There are certain sounds a man gets used to, sounds that become the white noise of his life. For some, it's the distant rumble of a freeway, or the gentle chirping of crickets. For me, it's the harmonious, whisper-quiet hum of 64 enterprise-grade servers processing, calculating, and serving data at the speed of light. It's the sound of my life's work, the sound of my bank account, the sound of my sanity. My sanctuary, my workspace, my Sistine Chapel, is a custom-built data center nestled in the basement of my unassuming suburban home. From the outside, my house is just another beige box in a sea of beige boxes, governed by the iron fist of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. But down here, surrounded by blinking green and blue lights, it's the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. I call her the mothership. A gleaming, 4-rack testament to a decade of sleepless nights, obsessive tinkering, and a level of cable management that would make a neurosurgeon weep with envy. Some guys have classic cars they polish on weekends. I have Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, my trio of primary web servers. I have Cerberus, my 3-headed firewall. I have a whole pantheon of digital gods, and their collective happiness depends on one simple, elemental force, a constant, unwavering 68 degrees Fahrenheit. "Just a little checkup, guys," I murmured, tapping a few commands into my terminal. "Gotta make sure you're all feeling fresh." I was performing my weekly routine maintenance, a ritual I found more calming than yoga or meditation. This was my Zen garden, and the gentle whoosh of the industrial-grade HVAC system was my mantra. That cool, steady breeze was the only thing preventing this digital pantheon from having a very literal, very expensive meltdown. It was the only thing standing between my client's precious data and a puddle of silicon, melted plastic, and shattered dreams. That's when the first alarm blared. Not out loud, I'm not an animal. It was a flash of angry red on my main monitoring screen. Critical alert, rack 2, ambient temp, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. I blinked. 85? That had to be a sensor glitch. I ran a quick diagnostic. The sensor was fine. I pulled up the main environmental controls. The temperature reading for the entire room was climbing. 86, 87. My blood ran cold, a stark contrast to the suddenly stuffy air in the room. I glanced at the digital thermostat on the wall. The screen was blank. The AC was dead. My mind raced. A blown fuse? A capacitor giving up the ghost? I bolted from my chair and sprinted up the basement stairs, my socked feet slipping on the hardwood. I didn't even bother with shoes as I burst out the back door and rounded the corner of the house. And there it was. Or rather, there she was. Brenda Karen Kravitz, the self-appointed queen of Harmony Creek, vice president of vexations, and the living embodiment of a strongly worded email. She was standing next to my outdoor AC condenser unit, a pair of pruning shears in one hand, admiring her prize-winning rose bushes with an air of profound satisfaction. The main circuit breaker switch, located in a gray box right next to the unit, was flipped decisively to the off position. Of course, it was always her, the architect of all my suburban misery. I felt a vein begin to throb in my temple. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that homicide, while tempting, would likely violate several HOA bylaws. "Brenda?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Fancy seeing you here. Did you by any chance happen to develop a sudden, overwhelming urge to inspect my circuit breakers?" She didn't even bother to look up from a particularly offensive-looking petal. "Leopold," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She was the only person on the planet who called me Leopold. "I noticed your industrial equipment was making an unsightly humming noise. It was disturbing the neighborhood's designated quiet enjoyment hours." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Quiet enjoyment? Brenda, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The only thing enjoying the quiet right now are my servers as they slowly bake to death. And that unsightly humming is the only thing preventing my house, and a significant portion of the local economy, from melting into a puddle of regret. She finally turned to face me, a prim, patronizing smile plastered on her face. It was the kind of smile that made you want to test the structural integrity of her garden gnome collection. The bylaws are quite clear, Leopold. I should know I drafted the amendment myself. Section C, paragraph 4. No unapproved industrial machinery shall be operated on residential properties. Your server farm is a clear and egregious violation. It's a data center, Brenda, not a steel mill, I ground out, my hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. And it was approved. We went over this 6 months ago. You were there. You signed the paperwork. I could picture the meeting perfectly. It was a 3-hour ordeal where she spent 20 minutes complaining that the shade of my welcome mat was too welcoming and suggested a more authoritatively neutral beige. Brenda gave a delicate little laugh, a sound like grinding glass. I have no recollection of approving such a monstrosity. My signature must have been forged. And even if it wasn't, the board reserves the right to revoke any approval that results in a nuisance. The hum was a nuisance. I glanced at my watch. A trickle of sweat ran down my back. I could feel the heat radiating from the house. In the basement, digital Armageddon was imminent. My clients, a local hospital, a dozen small businesses, an accounting firm in the middle of tax season. Their data was cooking. I tried one last time to appeal to the tiny, shriveled husk of humanity I prayed existed somewhere within her. Brenda, listen to me. This is serious. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. The hospital's scheduling system, patient records. Oh, please, she scoffed, turning back to her roses. Such melodrama. If your little computer hobby is that important, perhaps you should have thought about the noise pollution before installing it. The board will be issuing a formal citation and a fine of $200, and another $200 for every day the nuisance continues. I stared at the back of her perfectly coiffed helmet of hair. Reasoning with her was like trying to explain quantum physics to a bowl of petunias. She wasn't just enforcing a rule. She was enjoying it. This was power in its purest, pettiest form. And that's when the idea hit me. It was a terrible, beautiful, magnificently absurd idea. It was going to be loud. It was going to be ugly. It was going to be expensive. And it was going to be so satisfying. A slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. She wanted to complain about an unsightly humming? Oh, honey, you haven't heard anything yet. You know what, Brenda? I said, my voice suddenly light and cheerful. You're right. The bylaws are the bylaws. I'll take care of it immediately. She glanced over her shoulder, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. See that you do. I turned and walked back toward my house, pulling out my phone. I had to act fast. According to my phone's remote monitoring app, the mothership was now at a balmy 95 degrees. I had minutes. I stabbed a number on my speed dial. It rang twice. Sal's Temp Assure, this is Sal. Hey, Sal, it's Leo Maxwell, I said, my voice tight with urgency. Got a bit of an emergency. Yeah, a real 5-alarm fire, but with less fire and more existential dread. Leo, my boy, what's the crisis? Did the missus finally figure out how much you spent on that new graphics card? Worse, I said, pacing my now sweltering living room. The HOA has struck again. Listen, how fast can you get one of your mobile chiller units over to my place? There was a pause on the other end. A chiller? What do you need, the 5-tonner for the tent weddings? No, Sal, I said, stopping to look out the window at Brenda, who was now meticulously fertilizing her lawn. I need the big one. I need the Arctic Goliath. The one you use to cool down the convention center in July. The one that has its own zip code. Another pause, longer this time. The 80-ton tractor-trailer unit? Leo, are you serious? That thing runs on a diesel generator the size of a smart car. It's not exactly subtle. Sal, my friend, subtlety just left the building, I said, watching Brenda aim a garden hose at a single defiant weed. My entire data center is about to turn into a fondue pot. My career is on the line. And, more importantly, if my servers melt, your nephew loses access to pixel warriors, and I know for a fact I host the primary authentication server for the entire Midwest region. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sal's head. The Arctic Goliath it is, he said finally, his voice now all business. Where do you want it? Right on the street, Sal, directly in front of my house. And if you could be so kind as to aim the primary exhaust port directly at my neighbor's prize-winning petunias, there's an extra $500 in it for you. There was a hearty laugh from the other end of the line. Leo, you are a special kind of crazy, and I am here for every second of it. My crew is on the way. ETA 45 minutes. Try not to let anything actually catch fire before we get there. I hung up the phone, a feeling of giddy, reckless power surging through me. The temperature in the server room was now cresting 100 degrees. The alarms on my monitor were a solid wall of crimson. I started a controlled shutdown of non-essential systems, triaging what I could save. It was a race against time, a battle of wills between me and a woman armed with pruning shears and a pathological love of rules. And I was about to bring a bazooka to a knife fight. The next 40 minutes were the most stressful of my life. I watched the temperature climb with the same morbid fascination one watches a car crash in slow motion. 101, 102. I was in the digital equivalent of an Apollo 13 scenario, running on backup power, shedding systems, and praying for a miracle. And then I heard it. It started as a low rumble, a distant vibration that rattled the windows. It grew steadily louder, a deep, throaty growl that promised deliverance. I peered out my living room window. Down the street, turning onto our quiet, tree-lined lane, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was an 18-wheeler, a colossal Kenworth tractor pulling a trailer the size of a small house. Emblazoned on the side in bright blue letters were the words, Sal's Temp-Assure Cooling Solutions. It was the Arctic Goliath. And it was my chariot of the gods. Kids on bikes skidded to a halt, their mouths agape. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the block. Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down, who was out walking her poodle, froze mid-stride, the dog yapping in confusion at the mechanical behemoth. The truck's air brakes hissed as it pulled to a stop directly in front of my house. The cab door swung open, and Sal himself hopped down. He was a burly, no-nonsense guy with a thick mustache and arms like tree trunks. He surveyed the idyllic suburban scene, then looked at me as I practically skipped out the front door. "Leo, my boy!" he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to realign my spine. "What in the 7 circles of hell did you get yourself into?" "Me? I did nothing," I said, grinning like an idiot. "I'm the victim here, Sal. A victim of petty tyranny and a complete disregard for the sanctity of well-ventilated server racks." Sal chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to fit the truck. "Right, a victim. So you want me to park this beast right here? On the street? The HOA is gonna love this." "Not just on the street, Sal. Right here," I said, pointing to the perfect spot. "And I believe we had a discussion about the exhaust port and a certain patch of petunias?" A slow, appreciative grin spread across Sal's face. "Leo, my friend, You are my kind of customer. Boys, let's get the Frosty a Big Boy fired up. Customer has a special request regarding floral arrangements. Two technicians, who looked like they could be Sal's younger, equally burly brothers, hopped out and got to work with an efficiency that was a thing of beauty. They were a whirlwind of activity, deploying stabilizers, checking fluid levels, and uncoiling what looked like the world's largest slinkies, two massive insulated ducts, each easily 3 feet in diameter. Meanwhile, I had prepared the entry point. I'd completely removed the large picture window in my living room, leaving a gaping hole. My neighbors, already bewildered, now looked truly concerned. They probably thought I was being evicted in the most dramatic way possible. Sal's crew hoisted one of the giant ducts and expertly fed it through the window, across my living room floor. I'd laid down tarps, I'm not a complete savage, and down the basement stairs, connecting it directly to the server room's primary air intake. Then came the moment of truth. Sal walked to a control panel on the side of the trailer and flipped a series of switches. With a deep shudder, the diesel generator roared to life. It wasn't a hum. It was a declaration of war. A deep, powerful, earth-shaking thrum that vibrated through the soles of my feet and rattled the mailboxes across the street. A plume of exhaust puffed directly into Brenda's meticulously manicured flower bed. The petunias wilted almost instantly. The Arctic Goliath was alive. A few seconds later, a blast of deliciously cold air, the temperature of a polar bear's kiss, began pouring into my basement. I checked my phone. The server room temperature had already dropped a degree. The tide was turning. And right on cue, her front door flew open so hard it nearly came off its hinges. Brenda stormed out onto her lawn, her face no longer smug, but a twisted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to vibrate with her fury. "Leopold!" she shrieked, her voice barely audible over the glorious roar of the generator. "What is the meaning of this monstrosity?" I casually strolled over to the edge of my lawn, cupping a hand to my ear. "Sorry, Brenda, can't hear you," I yelled back cheerfully. "There's a bit of a hum." "I'm calling the police!" she screamed, stabbing at her phone with a trembling finger. "This is a commercial vehicle. It's a zoning violation. It's obscene. You'll be towed and fined into oblivion." "Be my guest," I shouted back, unable to keep the triumphant grin off my face. "I've already checked the municipal code. It's legally parked, not blocking a driveway within 18 inches of the curb. As for the HOA, I've read the bylaws cover to cover. There's nothing about temporary vehicle-based climate control solutions." Her response was lost in the din as she furiously spoke to a 911 dispatcher. I gave Sal a thumbs up. He saluted me from the cab of his truck. My servers were now down to a chilly 90 degrees and falling fast. Victory was so close I could taste it, and it tasted like diesel fumes and sweet, sweet revenge. It took less than 10 minutes for a squad car to arrive. It pulled up behind the Arctic Goliath, looking like a toy in comparison. 2 officers got out. One was a grizzled veteran, probably in his late 50s, with a weary look that suggested he'd seen it all. His name tag read Miller. His partner was younger, maybe late 20s, with a bright, alert expression. His tag said Rodriguez. Brenda descended upon them like a hawk on a field mouse. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This maniac," she gestured wildly at me, "has parked this power plant in our quiet residential neighborhood. It's a violation of every rule imaginable. Arrest him!" Officer Miller listened patiently, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. He then ambled over to me, his eyes taking in the whole absurd scene, the giant truck, the massive ducts snaking into my house, me standing there in my socks. "Son," he said with a tired sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 domestic disputes. You want to tell me why there's a semi-truck that sounds like a 747 is trying to land on it, parked in the middle of this nice, quiet street? I gave him my most earnest, law-abiding citizen smile. Absolutely, officer. You see, that lady there, I pointed a thumb at Brenda, who was now explaining her grievances to Officer Rodriguez, is the president of our homeowners association. This afternoon, she took it upon herself to illegally enter my property and shut off the power to my home's air conditioning unit at the main breaker. Miller's eyebrows shot up. She did what now? Endangered over $1 million worth of computer equipment, I continued, pressing my advantage, which, among other things, hosts the primary scheduling and record software for Harmony Creek General Hospital. That got his attention. But it was his partner who really perked up. Wait a minute, Officer Rodriguez said, jogging over. He had a gleam in his eye I recognized instantly, the look of a fellow nerd. Your house? Are you Elmax, the guy who runs the servers for Pixel Warriors? I puffed out my chest. The one and only, and the entire northern realm of Eldoria was about to go offline permanently if I didn't get the temperature under control. Rodriguez's eyes went wide. No way! My clan has a raid scheduled for tonight. You're a hero! He looked at the chiller truck with newfound reverence. Officer Miller, looking less impressed but clearly processing this new information, turned his attention back to Brenda. Ma'am, he said, his voice firm. Did you tamper with this man's electrical panel? Brenda sputtered, momentarily caught off guard. It was making a noise. It was a nuisance. The bylaws— Ma'am, I don't care about the bylaws, Miller cut her off. I care about the law, and tampering with someone's electrical service is a crime. Did you do it? Her face went pale as she realized her authority ended where the law began. I simply flipped a switch. Miller shook his head slowly, then turned back to me. Is the truck legally parked? Yes, sir, I said confidently. Not blocking any driveways, well within 18 inches of the curb. I even fed the meter just in case. I gestured vaguely down the street. The fact that there wasn't a parking meter for 10 miles was irrelevant. It was about the spirit of compliance. Officer Miller took one long, weary look at Brenda, who was now fuming silently. He looked at the roaring, magnificent truck. He looked at his starstruck partner, who was now asking me about the next Pixel Warriors expansion pack. He looked back at Brenda. Ma'am, as far as I can see, no laws are being broken here, he declared. The truck is legally parked. It's a civil matter between you and him regarding the noise. I suggest you go back inside. He then lowered his voice slightly and looked directly at her. And I would strongly advise against touching his property ever again. Have a good day. He tipped his hat to me, nudged his partner, and they walked back to their car. As they drove away, I could see them both laughing. Brenda was left standing on the sidewalk, sputtering with impotent rage. The Arctic Goliath roared on, a monument to my victory. The air pumping into my basement was now a brisk 65 degrees. The mothership was safe. I gave Brenda a little wave and a wink. Have a nice day, neighbor, I chirped over the din. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. But for the first time, it held no power. It was just the impotent glare of a tyrant who had finally met an immovable object. An immovable, 80-ton, diesel-powered object. The war had just begun, but I had won the first, most glorious battle. The Arctic Goliath became the new, defining feature of Harmony Creek. For the next 48 hours, it was a constant, rumbling presence, a testament to my glorious, malicious compliance. The street, once a quiet, suburban cliché, was now the site of an ongoing industrial spectacle. Life divided into two camps, Team Leo and Team Brenda. The neighborhood response was a fascinating social experiment. Mrs. Henderson, the poodle lady, initially seemed horrified. But after I explained that Brenda's actions had nearly crashed the server that hosted her online book club's forum, she became my staunchest ally. The next morning, she left a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies on my doorstep with a note that read, "Give her hell, Leo." Mr. Abernathy from across the street, a retired mechanic, came over just to admire the generator. "A Detroit diesel V8, he'd shouted over the roar, a look of pure joy on his face. "Haven't seen one of these beauties up close in years. You're a legend, kid." Of course, Brenda had her loyalists. The Finches, 2 houses down, were her disciples. They'd glare at me every time I went to get my mail, shaking their heads in theatrical disapproval. I'd just smile and give them a cheerful wave, which only seemed to infuriate them more. Brenda, naturally, did not take her defeat lying down. My mailbox was suddenly flooded with official-looking envelopes from the HOA. I received a violation notice for unapproved vehicle aesthetics. I received another for excessive decibel levels during designated quiet hours, which, according to her, was now 24 hours a day. My favorite was the citation for improper ductwork installation, citing a non-existent rule about flexible tubing crossing property lines. It didn't. I started using the violation notices as coasters for the cold beers I'd enjoy in a lawn chair in my front yard, basking in the cool breeze wafting from the chiller's vents. She tried to rally the other 2 members of the HOA board for an emergency meeting. But Frank, the treasurer, was a mild-mannered accountant who just wanted to be left alone. And Donna, the secretary, was the one who had told me about Mrs. Henderson's book club forum. They had both been on the receiving end of my well-researched, legally sound rebuttals in the past over things like the unapproved shade of my garbage cans. They wanted no part of this escalating war. Brenda was an army of 1. I, meanwhile, was a king in my castle. The server room was maintaining a blissful Arctic 62 degrees. I'd sit out front in my lawn chair, sipping an iced tea, the deep thrum of the chiller my personal victory anthem. I was paying Sal a small fortune per day for the rental, but every time I saw Brenda's curtains twitch, I knew it was worth every penny. This wasn't about money anymore. This was a statement. But I knew the Arctic Goliath was a temporary solution. It was a magnificent stopgap, but I needed a permanent Brenda-proof plan. I needed to go on the offensive. My vengeance would be silent, invisible, and absolute. That's why, on day 3 of the siege, I had a meeting in my backyard with a new set of contractors. The company was called Terra Cool Solutions, and their lead engineer, a sharp, incredibly competent woman named Maria, was staring at the chiller truck with an expression of profound amusement. "So, let me get this straight," she said, tapping her stylus against her tablet. "You're running a mission-critical data center off a reefer truck because your HOA president has a personal vendetta against you?" "That's the Cliff's Notes version, yeah," I said, taking a sip of lemonade. "She unplugged my life's work, Maria. She must be stopped." "I like a man with a clear objective," she said with a grin. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm thinking we go nuclear," I said. "Figuratively, of course. I want to go geothermal. No external unit. Nothing for her to see, nothing for her to hear, and most importantly, nothing for her to unplug. We'll dig straight down. I want a closed-loop system, buried so deep she'd need a mining permit to even get a look at it." Maria's eyes lit up. "Geothermal for a residential data center? That's ambitious and elegant. I love it." "There's more," I added, leaning in conspiratorially. "While we're at it, I want to soundproof the entire server room. Not just sound dampen, I'm talking studio-grade anechoic chamber-level soundproofing. I want it so quiet in there you can hear a microprocessor thinking. I want her to be able to press her ear against the foundation of my house and hear nothing but the sound of her own defeat." Maria let out a low whistle. "Mr. Maxwell, it's going to be astronomically expensive." "Maria," I said, meeting her gaze with the steely resolve of a man who had been pushed too far. "At this point, it's not about the money. It's about sending a message." A slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. "I like your style. We can have a geological survey team here tomorrow, and the drilling rig can be here by Friday." We spent the next hour in my backyard, a strategic war council plotting the final decisive move in the HOA war of 2025. We sat at my patio table, surrounded by blueprints and schematics. We were designing the perfect weapon, a cooling system so discreet, so powerful, and so utterly self-contained that Brenda Kravitz would have no legal or physical means to interfere with it ever again. The plan was beautiful in its elegant, expensive pettiness. The checkmate was in sight. Friday arrived, and with it, the dawn of a new era of industrial disruption on our quiet suburban street. If the neighbors thought the Arctic Goliath was a spectacle, they were woefully unprepared for what came next. At precisely 8 a.m., an even larger, more menacing vehicle rumbled into view. A full-sized drilling rig, the kind used for digging water wells, mounted on a massive flatbed truck. It was followed by a convoy of support vehicles, a water tanker, a mud pump, and a flatbed carrying stacks of drilling pipe. Fort Leo was about to get some serious fortifications. The arrival of this new mechanical titan was the final straw for Brenda. The chiller truck was a nuisance. This was an invasion. She flew out of her house, a whirlwind of beige and fury, her face the color of a ripe tomato. She didn't even bother shouting my name this time. She just made a beeline for the lead truck, her arms flailing. "You can't do this!" she screeched at the bewildered foreman, a man who looked like he ate gravel for breakfast. "I forbid it! I'll get an injunction! I'll lie down in front of the truck!" I chose that moment to make my grand entrance. I strolled out onto my lawn, holding a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a thick sheaf of papers in the other. "Morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Lovely day for some light excavation, isn't it?" Her head snapped towards me, her eyes blazing with the heat of 1,000 suns. "Leopold, I will not allow this. I will chain myself to that demonic machine." "Too late, Brenda," I said, taking a calm sip of my coffee. I held up the papers. "I already have the permits, all of them. City, county, even a geological survey confirming I won't be disturbing any ancient burial grounds or badger habitats. It's all in order." "I don't care about your fraudulent permits," she shrieked. "The HOA forbids this kind of construction." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," I said, wagging a finger at her. "I submitted the architectural and landscaping plans to the review committee last week via certified mail. I have the receipt. According to Section G, Paragraph 2 of the bylaws, an excellent and very thorough section, by the way, the Architectural Review Committee has 30 days to respond to any submission. If they fail to respond within that time frame, the plans are automatically approved as submitted." I paused for dramatic effect. "You, Frank, and Donna are the committee. You never responded. Therefore, my plans are approved. It's in the bylaws. You wrote them, remember?" The color drained from her face. I had weaponized her own ridiculously complex bureaucracy against her. It was the most satisfying moment of my life. But she wasn't done. In a final, desperate act of defiance, she actually did it. She marched right up to the front of the massive drilling rig, planted her feet, and crossed her arms. A small, furious woman standing against a 20-ton mountain of steel and hydraulic fluid. The construction crew, under the strict instructions Maria and I had given them, simply stopped what they were doing and waited. They started passing around a bag of donuts. They'd seen this movie before, and inevitably, the grand finale. The familiar black and white squad car pulled up. Officer Miller and Officer Rodriguez got out, and this time, Miller didn't even try to hide his annoyance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "What is it now?" "He's drilling," Brenda cried, pointing at the rig. "He's trying to frack in my front yard." "It's a geothermal heating and cooling system, officer," I clarified, handing the stack of permits to Rodriguez, who started leafing through them with interest. "Completely green. Very environmentally friendly." Miller sighed the sigh of a man contemplating early retirement. "Ma'am, you are now actively interfering with a legally permitted construction project. That is a misdemeanor. You need to move, or I will have to place you under arrest." Brenda looked at him, her world crumbling. "You're taking his side? Again?" Officer Rodriguez looked up from the permits, a grin tugging at his lips. "Ma'am, we're on the side of the law. He has permits from 3 different municipal bodies and what appears to be a passive-aggressive but legally sound approval from the HOA. You, on the other hand, have admitted to tampering with his electrical systems and are now obstructing a permitted operation. As my partner said, it's not a tough call. Defeated. Utterly and completely defeated." The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. She gave me one last look of pure, concentrated hatred, a silent promise of future, petty battles to come. But she knew, and I knew, that she had lost the war. She turned and shuffled back to her house, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The foreman gave me a nod. I nodded back. "Let her rip," I said. With a deafening roar, the drill bit spun to life and bit into the earth of my front yard. It was the sound of progress, the sound of silence to come, the sound of absolute, unequivocal victory. A few weeks later, a new quiet settled over Harmony Creek. It was a silence that felt earned. The drilling rig was gone. The support trucks were gone. The glorious, rumbling Arctic Goliath was gone, having been decommissioned with a handshake and a hefty but well-deserved final payment to Sal. The street was quiet again. Almost too quiet. Down in the basement, however, things had never been better. The mothership was purring along in an atmosphere so perfectly chilled and still, it felt like a holy place. The new geothermal system was a masterpiece of engineering. There was no hum, no vibration, no external evidence whatsoever that beneath my unassuming beige house, a technological marvel was silently and efficiently battling the laws of thermodynamics. I stood there for a long moment, just basking in it. The silence. Well, not total silence. There was still the gentle, reassuring electronic whisper of the servers themselves, the digital heartbeat of my life's work. But outside? Nothing. No condenser unit on the side of the house, no giant truck at the curb, just a neatly patched-up lawn where the drilling rig once stood. I glanced out the basement window, which offered a perfect, ground-level view of Brenda's property. And there she was. She was standing at the edge of her lawn, holding a small electronic device, a decibel meter. She was sweeping it back and forth along my property line, her expression one of intense, frustrated concentration. She was desperately searching for a new violation, a new front on which to wage her war. She found nothing. She stood there for a full minute, the decibel meter hanging uselessly in her hand. A general with no army, no war to fight, and no noise to complain about. For a fleeting second, I almost felt a sliver of pity for her. A person whose entire identity was wrapped up in control had just lost it, completely and irrevocably. The moment passed, replaced by a wave of deep, profound satisfaction. That Saturday was the annual Harmony Creek HOA community barbecue, an event I typically avoided like a root canal. It was usually a hot, awkward affair filled with forced smiles and passive-aggressive comments about lawn maintenance. But this year, I felt compelled to attend. This year, it wasn't a social obligation. It was a victory lap. I threw on a clean shirt, grabbed a six-pack of craft beer, and strolled down the block to the community park. As I walked onto the grass, a hush fell over the small crowd. Conversations sputtered and died. All eyes turned to me. I wasn't Leo Maxwell, the quiet IT guy from down the street anymore. I was a figure of legend. I was the man who fought the HOA and won. I was the guy who parked a semi-truck in front of his house for 3 days out of sheer, brilliant spite. A moment later, the spell was broken. Mr. Abernathy, the retired mechanic, let out a booming laugh and came over to slap me on the back. "There he is, the revolutionary! Leo, you glorious bastard, let me get you a burger!" Suddenly, I was the most popular guy at the party. Neighbors who had previously only given me a curt nod were now shaking my hand, their eyes filled with a new respect, a mixture of awe and vicarious amusement. Frank, the HOA treasurer, sidled up to me nervously. "Leo," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Great to see you. Say, the board was, thinking about the new budget for landscaping the front entrance. We were wondering if you had any input on the matter." I had become the de facto king, the quiet authority they now felt compelled to consult. They'd seen what happened when you crossed someone who not only read the fine print but was willing to rent heavy machinery to enforce it. "I think whatever you guys decide will be great, Frank," I said with a gracious smile. "Just make sure it's all properly documented." He nodded eagerly and scurried away. Across the park, I saw her. Brenda was sitting alone at a picnic table, poking at a bowl of potato salad with a plastic fork. She was a queen in exile, ostracized not by force, but by the sheer weight of her own defeated agenda. No one was sitting with her. No one was laughing at her jokes. Her power, derived entirely from the fear of her ridiculous rules, had vanished. This was the moment, the final move. I grabbed a paper plate, loaded it with a token amount of food, and walked over. She looked up as my shadow fell over her, her eyes immediately wary and hostile. "Leopold," she said, her voice flat. "Brenda," I replied, matching her tone. I sat down opposite her, placing my plate on the table. I looked her directly in the eye, my expression one of absolute, unwavering sincerity. "I just wanted to say thank you." She blinked, completely thrown. "What on earth are you talking about?" "My old AC unit," I said, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret. "It was terribly inefficient. A real energy hog. I'd been meaning to upgrade for years, but you know how it is. You get busy. You put things off." I shook my head with mock regret. You shutting it down, as unpleasant as it was at the time, was the final push I needed to invest in the new geothermal system. I got my first electric bill since it was installed. I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "It's down 40%, Brenda. 40. You've saved me a fortune in the long run. So, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the financial advice." I gave her a cheerful, blindingly genuine smile. I reached across the table and gave her hand a light, friendly pat. Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. She just stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process the sheer, unmitigated audacity of my statement. I had taken her greatest act of aggression and reframed it as a personal favor. I hadn't just beaten her, I'd thanked her for it. The checkmate was complete. Without another word, I stood up, leaving her utterly speechless at the picnic table. I walked over to a group of laughing neighbors, where Officer Rodriguez, now off duty and in a Pixel Warriors t-shirt, handed me a cold beer. "That was brutal, man," he said, grinning from ear to ear. Absolutely savage. I'm glad you're on my clan server. I raised my bottle in a toast to malicious compliance, to reading the bylaws, and to the sweet, silent, and incredibly satisfying hum of a perfectly cooled data center. The war was over, and the peace was beautiful.